Hi friends, today in our Going Digital series, we have a very special guest and a dear friend who's been the head of IT and systems in Asian Paints, has been after almost 20 years in the IT function, has recently moved to the supply chain function. He's heading the supply chain at Asian Paints. He's also an alumnus of NIT Surat and IIM Calcutta. So today we'll be discussing an interesting topic in our Going Digital series. We're going to be talking about the transition from a CIO to a CXO and the unique challenges it throws up, the opportunities, and so on. So, a warm welcome to today's guest in our Going Digital series, Harish Lade.
Hey, thanks, Siddharth, and really thanks for having me on the show. Been really following the Going Digital series and quite a few inspirational talks in this times, right? So looking forward to this conversation.
Great. So lovely to have you here today, Harish. So let's jump straight into the questions, right? So the first question I had for you, you recently made this unusual transition after almost 20 years in the digital world to the physical world of managing one of the most complex yet successful supply chains in the country. So what prompted this move?
So actually, this was a shift which happened 2 years back. And really, I think it was an opportunity which Mr. KBS Anand kind of made that offer to me 2 years back and said, "Hey, Harish, you've been working on transforming supply chain from the digital side. How would you consider moving on the other side and really run the supply chain?" And really, obviously, that came as a surprise. But I think what I really felt at that moment is that if he's willing to take this bet, that really moving an IT. I mean, I've been doing IT throughout and a lot of supply chain initiatives for almost 20-21 years in Asian Paints. If he's willing to put the faith, then why not take the plunge, right? So really, it was a decision where I felt that if companies putting this faith, let's take up the opportunity. And I looked at it like a real opportunity to learn business actually in the game, right? So that really prompted me to really take on the challenge.
Lovely. So tell me about what kind of unique challenges this threw up, right? I mean, while in the IT function you do interact very deeply with business, but the transition from IT directly into the business, business function, what kind of unique challenges did this throw up?
Yeah, actually, I did expect a few things to kind of be different. Although what was the biggest comfort was that I've been an Asian Paints person throughout my life. Post campus, joined the organization and been part of various IT-led transformation initiatives. And I think Asian Paints IT, as I think you also know, right, works very, very closely with business. And per se, in my case, I had in the initial years spent time on the shop floor. We were implementing integrated plant systems in our plant in North India way back in '96, and then part of some of the leading supply chain transformation initiatives. All of that, right? So I think in terms of knowing the aspects and processes, I really didn't expect much challenges. Although there are surprises when you really move over. I think the single biggest challenge, and that's what also I had kind of kept as a back of my mind, was about really the people, because all said and done, an IT functions are typically pretty compact, right? And yeah, you deal with people, but moving from probably the smallest function in terms of people in Asian Paints to one of the largest in terms of headcount, I think that was one of the interesting challenges. And really, it was a gamut of people you to deal with, right from folks in the factory unions to our very different set of partners. I mean, IT, you deal with a lot of partners, vendors, and ecosystem. Here, the ecosystem is completely different. So I think the people part was probably the biggest challenge to kind of really get into. Yeah, but I think in fact, that was a trepidation. That will I be a people person, having spent so much time in technology? And I think that was one thing to really cross over. I think the other part also was about really dealing with lot of different kind of external entities, more so in terms of dealing with government bodies, statutory bodies at that level. So that was the other challenge, a very different aspect about dealing with the people problem. And the third one, right? And since we are talking about being in digital, I think was about dealing with data. Now we wonder what is this about, right? So all our lives we deal with data, we run analytics initiatives, we create models and so on and so forth. But on the other side, you are really consuming data. And I think really dealing with so much of data and really making sense out of it is a very different experience, because probably as IT professionals, we kind of deal with so much data and maybe we look at some patterns, but the role of IT is more about architecture and setting up models, but really going through reams and reams of data, your trends and inventory patterns or stock out informations. That is a very different game. And I think for the first 6-7 months, I was really dealing with a lot of Excel sheets and a lot of digging deep into some of the information and trends, and more importantly using that to kind of really convert those into some of the business decisions. So I think the people and very different way in which you look at data, right, trends and growth indicators and so on and so forth, and I think that was a very interesting shift and challenge we had to deal with.
Very interesting. You spoke about people. Is acceptance of a person coming from the IT function into a business function, is acceptance also a challenge? Does that come about?
So actually, that was a real great team I had, and I think that really was not a challenge. I mean, they were colleagues. I had worked with them in a lot of IT initiatives, and being in Asian Paints, obviously there was a lot of familiarity. I think that really became a great team, which kind of allowed me to settle in. So that part of the acceptance was not really a challenge. The challenge obviously was to really now go and meet so many hundreds of people across our 8 factories, our subcontracting partners, and also I think the range of people you meet in supply chain is very different. I think the people on the shop floor, the people running the subcontracting locations, or even the vendors come a lot from the specialty chemical industry. They have a very different world. I think the language which is used over there is very different. I think we are used to a very different language in the IT world. I think that probably was the real challenge, to adapt and kind of get into their world.
Lovely. So you're telling me about some of the challenges you faced, managing the people aspect, managing data aspect, managing so many different stakeholders. You want to tell us about how did you manage these challenges and what were the lessons you learned from them?
I think the first thing when I moved in, I think I really traveled a lot. I think I spent the first 6-7 months spending a lot of time back again on the shop floor. And yeah, earlier we used to go as really for doing some system analysis and implementing systems in the earlier years, but now really going and spending time with the people on the shop floor. And I think that was really and asking lots and lots of questions. And I think that's one thing I think from the IT world really helped me, because I think when you typically design systems, you are always asking questions to understand what the user wants to accomplish. And I think that's what really I used a lot when I visited all our factories, spent time with our managers, spent time with some of the union leaders or the operators out there, really trying to understand their world. And really it's a different world. I think sometimes when we I think IT world has a different challenge in terms of IT job is 24/7 at times, right? I mean, systems can go down anytime. I think the world in the supply chain world is a lot physical, right? A lot of things kind of are done by people out there, and they really face real world constraints in a very different way. So really understanding their world, understanding their language, asking lots and lots of questions, meeting people in our other supply chain customer functions, whether it be our R&D labs. So spend a lot of time with our developers and understood what really goes into when they formulate a product, how does that really scale at a manufacturing level, what really goes what should be on the lookout for. And I think one thing which is great at Asian Paints is about the quality and the safety systems. So there's this legendary system set up almost 15 years back. So really understanding those systems and how they interplay with the business. I think some of those areas really help me navigate the transition in a great way.
Got that. So, want to tell us about what lessons were learned? I mean, these kind of transitions where you're moving from one function to the other. Like you said, you ask a lot of questions, and there's a huge amount of learning, I would assume. So, you want to share some of the key lessons that you learned? Like a digital supply chain, right? When you have, you put in tools to automate the supply chain, and then when you see what's really happening on the ground, that the tool is being used to decide ordering levels and so many other things, right? So what lessons did you learn from that? Share something.
So Asian Paints, I think our journey into digitizing supply chain probably is as old as the 70s, right? So I think there are innumerable stories about Asian Paints being very early in computerization, and those journeys started with really digitizing various aspects about supply chain. And I think over the years those systems have matured, and very latest cutting edge advanced planning, forecasting, AI ML based systems are kind of used. And I think the teams really make great use of some of these decision support systems out there. And when you move and start running the supply chain, I think what really hits us is that despite having so many advanced systems, I think your plan, when it as soon as you finish your planning, and the next moment your plan is out of sync, because the real world is constantly changing. There are events, and then the teams at that juncture really deal with making so many hundreds and thousands of decisions themselves. So in that sense, yeah, there is an optimized plan, but the moment you get into execution, there is everyday things to deal with. So I think that's something which in a way also strikes that how can we make life even more I would say optimize or simplify for the teams. I think that was one thing which struck me when I moved into the other part, and you can clearly see lots of opportunities, right? And I think now you can really understand the user IT gap in some sense, because what happens is that the user functions, and I'm just using the lingo of the IT world, I think they give system requirements when the problem really hits them in a big way. Otherwise, they're just dealing with those inefficiencies in a day-to-day life. And I think for that to become an IT project, I think it would have gone through maybe months and months of toiling, either manually or dealing with interfaces which probably didn't work. So people just made do with downloading that data from one system, doing whatever they had to do, and then transferring that into the next system for the process to kind of go on. Only at a juncture, when either there is a big error which happens because somebody slipped up, or there is a governance failure, is when suddenly that will come up as an IT requirement. And you could see innumerable opportunities that this is a process you could digitize, and this is where I can put in a RPA engine to remove this kind of a dependency. Here I can build another analytics dashboard. So all of that really kind of dawns in front of you. Because one thing is that I think whether there is an IT system or not, I think the teams have to constantly keep moving forward, because the real world will not wait for a systemic solution to emerge. Let's say if and I think more so in this last 1 year, where even a very efficient and a synchronized supply chain of Asian Paints was tested to the fullest because of the pandemic, and
Imagine, yeah.
that itself is a very different experience. And I think we could see areas, and I must say the systems really held on quite well. I think where we started feeling the pressure was more in terms of how our maybe the suppliers or the suppliers or the entire global transportation system in terms of freight, ship liners, or things happening at the ports, right? Something which you really couldn't control is what really put a lot of stress. And that probably now, as I reflect back, gives a whole lot of new areas where we can build in more and more of visibility system, control tower systems. And at least one thing which is coming up very strongly is that, going forward, I think we have to automate more and more of the routine decisions, which otherwise your teams would be kind of, taking help of, let's say, a data from SAP or a supply chain engine, collating those two and then taking decisions. I think a lot of those routine decisions, I think now can be built on a automated rule engine kind of a system. So a lot of those ideas now we are discussing with our IT teams now. So, it will be a very great way to kind of even further transition and move into a next level of maturity.
Fantastic. So you kind of preempted my next question, which was about, for a highly mature and automated and optimized supply chain like Asian Paints, how do you find areas of improvement? So, I mean, you've already shared some thoughts, but to move from what one would call an automated supply chain to a fully digital supply chain, end to end, right? You gave some ideas around that. What is that transition like? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think one thing which really, and that's the vision we've kind of already embarked on almost 2 years back, was to move into what at least the jargon, and I also kind of resonate with that thought, is about autonomous supply chain, where you would say that there are events happening across your length and breadth of the supply chain, and how do we really first of all capture those events, and these events could be within your four walls, or it could be with your suppliers. It could be on a shipment which is on the sea, or and people talk about control towers. What we are saying is, yeah, control tower is a foundation because it gives you visibility. But the next level is that how can we really start going behind the series of decisions which, let's say, a distribution executive or a planning manager is making almost on a daily basis, and say, okay, X percentage of those decisions, if there are enough data points, how can we make it into a automated rule? And then you really get into a zone where the collation of these decisions would lead to certain outcomes, and all outcomes may not work out in your favor, but now you can start judging those outcomes and start refining your own decision making engine. So the whole idea is that going forward, in this completely volatile world where there are so many events hitting you, how can we move at least maybe, I'm just taking a number here, maybe 50 to 60% of the decision to an autonomous engine, with the managers or our teams only acting as a supervisory control on that and only refining the algorithms. I think that's the journey which we want to kind of embark on going forward, because I think the old classical models of supply chain, they are there, they help the foundational work, but I think that's what will distinguish how the company would succeed. And I think some of that would strongly start marrying the customer expectation in terms of order fill rates or availability of product to your back-end decisions, by really orchestrating a very autonomous workflow within your organization and with your partner ecosystems, which would be your transporters or suppliers or whoever that. So I think that's the journey which really want to see how we can take on.
This is great. So Harish, how does one's experience in systems and digital initiatives help one to be successful in the physical world? For someone who's moving from IT, digital to a physical world of managing suppliers, logistics, dealer networks. How does my previous experience help me in doing something like this?
So I think the foundational, managerial or leadership skills kind of carry forward in any role or function. I think if I talk about myself, I think a lot of credit or goes to the context of the organization as well. I think you already asked that question as to what has been the acceptance of you in the function. So I think those are some of the larger organizational paradigms which have to obviously work favorably when you look at such a transition. I think, and the trust of the leadership of the organization also matters when you do this transition. Coming more specifically to how your skills in the digital or the IT world help make this transition. I think being in IT and more so in an IT function of Asian Paints, you really enjoy the working closely with business. So you really get a very cross or a horizontal view, and that really is something which really helps, because a lot of time, and I'm not picking one role versus the other, but when you're expertise in a business role, you know a lot about that business role, and maybe you know a little bit about the interfaces across, and only when you really rise to very senior levels you get a more horizontal view. In an IT profession, because you are kind of working on processes, by design your role allows you to work across functions. So I think that's one skill which really helps when you move. Your IT skill, which can really be leveraged very well when you go into any of these line functions, and I think that's something which really and I think in the current day and age, I would say there is very little divide between the digital and the physical, because I think more or less everything in all high performance companies is digitized, and I think bringing that knowledge and able to spot where the white spaces are, I think those are some of the skills which can really add value to the organization when you transition from an IT role into a kind of a line or a business role in that sense. Yeah.
Beautiful. So, what advice would you give to the budding CIOs, on whether they should consider this kind of a transition also, from the digital world to the physical world, from a CIO to a CXO? What are the pros and cons, whether they should consider it?
So I think again, I would say it's a lot in the context of a person's career and the organization they want to work with. And I'm just going to a hypothetical situation. Maybe doing this shift from, let's say, one organization to the other, I think would probably not be very advisable, because you deal with both the change of the new organization's culture and also a new domain. Within the organization, these movements really kind of help build a more rounded business leader kind of a persona, because at the end of the day, if you really want to become a business leader and maybe even head a PNL, or look at be a kind of a head of a particular business vertical, then really experiencing the line function gives a very different flavor to how your I think point of view changes. How you have to make decisions on the go, so that you kind of either get in the revenues or optimize cost, and really deal with that constraint in that moment and move on. And I think overall, I think it makes you a great people leader as well, which I think is the ultimate goal when you really strive to become the probably head of organization of any scale or size. I would say even after doing this role, if you come back into the IT role, it will be with a very different perspective. I think so both ways is a big advantage to try out this thing. And I really hope that a lot of organizations put faith in their IT leaders to take on such challenges. I think that also is something which really has to be a larger ecosystem kind of an understanding, that it's not IT versus business, but I think it's all about being part of the organization and taking that journey forward in a very strong way.
And I certainly hope that a couple of business leaders do see this and get inputs on about how making this transition is actually beneficial both to the organization as well as the individual making that transition. And if there is a supportive environment in an organization, this can be a fantastic success, win-win on all sides.
Yeah.
So I think superb inputs, Harish. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Expert inputs presented in the most pragmatic manner possible. Thank you so much for your time, Harish.
Hey, thanks, Siddharth, for having me.